Alright YouTubes, in today's video we're going to be prepping the Porsche Cayman GT4 for paint and painting the front and rear bumper and the side skirt panels. If you want to see the preparation that we've done to get this car up to primer, go and check that video out. So it's in primer now and we've filled all the chips, everything that we could see, and I've primed 3/4 of that bonnet. So me and Reese are just going over it now. Sometimes it's really hard to see every chip and get every chip. So once you get some primer on there and a little bit of sheen off of that primer, it can then highlight some chips that you may have missed. So we've had a good look over it and we can't see any.
Chicken up, didn't you?
I had a brief with that. When I had some to go, I don't think there was anything on it. But you did most of this anyway, didn't you?
Yeah.
Anything that was left was quite minuscule.
And then I chipped up.
Yeah.
Oh, it should be fine.
So I'm starting off with the block, 320 grit on the block, 3M Cubitron block and Cubitron strips. So I like to start off with the blocking of primer. I like to do it directional initially at first, so keep it in straight lines the way you would look across a panel. Obviously a bonnet, you're going to look from the front to the back, so that's your eye line, and that's the way I like to block, in that direction. It curves up at the edges, so I just sort of turn the block a little bit, use the edge of it a bit more. I have got a rounded edge block, but I can quite often get into the curves just by angling the block a little bit and doing it in little circles. Don't want to keep it too straight in a curved area, because you've got the risk of the edge of the block leaving score lines in the primer and cutting into it. So I do sort of one half, like I say, I start off initially just doing straight lines and then cross hatch a little bit, and then I do circles. So I use a combination of all the types of ways you can block a panel. Just got to get a bit of a feel for it. Obviously keep moving around. It's hard to block one big area in one go, so break it into sections and then come back into those sections and try and tie it all in together, you know, so you try and keep your block in as even as possible. There's no filler repairs or anything on this bonnet, so I'm not like trying to find a bit more level. And the way I repaired these chips, instead of sanding out all the chips individually or sanding a big area right back, because any stone chips really you're going to be going to bare metal, so to keep the shape of this bonnet, minimize putting any little ripples or divots in it, I've filled all the chips with fine filler instead of taking off all the layers of paint and going to bare metal. So one thing about obviously not priming the whole bonnet, and the reason behind, if you haven't seen the first video, reason behind not priming right to the back of the bonnet is I need to leave myself a bit of blend room, so leaving the corners of the bonnet to be my blending zone. So that's the reason for not priming it all. There were the odd chip up near there, but I managed to catch them. So obviously high build primer, I've got 3.5 good coats of primer on there, and you've got to make sure that, you know, that transition between your edge of your primer into your paint is blocked really well. I've seen it before, I've done it myself before, where you just don't take enough off at the end of your primer where the overspray is, and you can see the transition. So it's quite critical to make sure you flatten that transition right out. And I sort of stagger my layers of primer as the coats go up. I stagger them so there's not, you know, a full build of primer right up to where I've masked. So all the blocking, I've gone over all of it in straight lines and a bit of a combination of cross hatching. And now I always finish off, once I think I've got the level that I want and I've got it in the shape that I want, I just do big circles over all of it and just try and even everything up and tie it all in. So just big circles across the whole lot. If I've got any score lines from doing directional sanding and keeping it straight, by doing the big circles at the end, I'm just going to reduce those straight lines, those score lines that could be in the primer. Makes the DA stage a bit easier, a bit less work, and I'm sort of doing all angles then with circles, so I'm coming across the width and the length all in one go. So all the blocking's done now, so I've come to the second stage of the preparation. Obviously this is all dry sanding. This is the dry sanding method that I use. So I'll get all the dust blown off of it, clean it down and get some guide coat over it, get a good layer of guide coat on there, get it right into those scratches. And the second stage I'm going to be doing now is 500 grit with a big interface pad on, so with a soft pad on the DA. But I like to go around the edges first, so I'm going to go around the edges first with 500 grit soft pad, get all the edges done. I like doing it that way because then the DA's got a bit of a more refined scratch, a bit more of an even scratch on a dual action sander. So any little scores that them soft pads can sometimes leave, especially on high metallic colours and silvers, they can show up. The DA will catch those as well. That flash was mega. Excuse.
Oh, you're copying me now, I don't know.
The flash was. You shit yourself.
Like a nuke went off.
That was well close. That struck something, didn't it?
Pretty with a clap. Set a flag on fire. I had to leave that in. That was the loudest thunder I've ever heard, and I know I should be taking the mickey out of Reese because I jumped as well, but I thought it was funny, and his face looked as though he was just about to say "Mummy." So dual action stage now. Like I say, I use the bigger, thicker soft pad, interface pad, 10mm. I've got a 10mm and a 5mm. Sort of bit curvy, that bonnet curves all ways, so a thicker soft pad's better for getting into the curves and keeping it more consistent and even. I know I've got my levels with the blocking, so as long as you keep the DA moving fast, almost like blocking, use it like a block, don't keep it in one area, and again, go different ways, different angles. Thing with 2-pack primer, the DA pads I've got, I've been through so many different DA pads, and most of them, even the cheaper ones, are okay on paint, but dry sanding primer, most 2K high build primers are designed to be dry sanded and not wet flatted because they're porous, they're sucking moisture, so they're quite chalky. So I find with the cheaper DA pads, they clog up really easy. You know, I've got dust extraction and it's got the holes, you know, multi holes all over it, but they still clog up because they produce a lot of dust when you sand them. So they don't cut them once they've clogged up with dust. Even though the grit might be okay on them, the cheaper ones seem to really clog up. So I find really only the 3M ones have longevity on primer. Like I say, the cheaper ones are okay on just painted surfaces. They're okay. So I don't use the most expensive 3M ones. I have bought the Cubitron ones in the past, and they are fantastic, and they do really last, and they work well. How they stop them from clogging up, I don't know, but they don't clog up half as much as the cheaper ones. So I just use their mid-range ones from 3M because they're not too bad on price, and they have got a bit of longevity. So that's the end of the prepping on the bonnet of the front end of the Porsche, and now we're on to the painting stage of the parts. So obviously can't fit it all in the booth at once, so we've got all the parts prepped, same procedure as the bonnet, but I do finish anything that's quite high metallic, silvers and any of those types of colours. After the 500 grit stage, I do whip over it all with 600 grit. So I was in two minds quite often with like front bumpers, like on this car, on this job. It's been primed all over. It was in for chips, so it's been primed all over. There'd be the odd ones that we miss, and we catch them on top of the primer, so we fill them on top of the primer. And with all the little nooks and crannies and the sanding and all the soft pads, doing it all dry and everything, there's always a little bit of a risk of it being a little bit scratchy in some areas. So I do like to, most of the time, bumpers and plastic parts off the car, I give them a coat of wet on wet. But wet on wet, no matter how good it is or how well you apply it, it always has a slight detrimental effect to the finish. It adds a little bit of texture. Sometimes you don't catch it quite right. You got to be it's quite critical wet on wet to get that right first time. And you know, I'm not perfect, and sometimes I get wet on wet onto a job and I don't like the texture it's left me. And you can start chasing that, trying to get that texture out. You can't go adding more wet on wet to it. So I didn't want any issues along those type of lines. So I was conscious of it being silver and maybe some scoring showing. When you get light going into the base coat, you can sometimes see it lightly. So what I've done with these plastic parts, we prepped them really well, finished them off with 600 grit. And I give it all a coat of blender coat, because blender coat fills in little micro scratches. I had no real breakthroughs to take care of or anything like that. So I give it all a coat of blender coat because I know that dries completely transparent and smooth, just like the base coat does. So Mipa blender coat went on there first instead of me wet and wetting it, and I think it was the right choice, to be honest with you. So it's Mipa water base. That's the system I'm on, Mipa, the Mipa water base. And if you haven't seen the first video, we had a few colour issues that I explained with this colour. So it's GT silver, and the car came in and all the plastic parts, the shade wasn't too bad. Plastic parts have always got a bit of a variation on pretty much most production vehicles, regardless of the mark and the cost of the vehicle. So it was your usual slight, you know, a little bit of a shade out, all the plastics to the body, but the metallic was completely different on this vehicle. So the vehicle GT silver, the body was quite a coarse metallic, and all the plastics were a finer metallic. So after doing some correction with the Spectro and getting the shade better with the 2 shades that we had on our system. I've done a few spray outs and played about, swapped the metallic out that was in the formula for a coarser one, and we seem to have got the colour pretty good. So with this Mipa water base, it's 2.5 coats. If it's a normal covering colour, which silvers cover pretty well in this system, most colours do on this system, I'll give it a sort of half coat, like a stabilising coat as the first coat, dry that out, and then I give it a double coat as my coverage coat. So basically two applications, the half coat, dry that out, and then get all my coverage in the second application, where I double it up on each section that I paint. I double it up, come back on myself, and that's all the coverage. And then after that, once I've dried that out, get some heat in the booth, dry that out, cool it down, and it's a 1 bar drop coat. The spray gun I'm using on this is a Satajet X5500 HVLP, and it's a 1.2i setup, and the application of the base coat is done at 2 bar for the application and 1 bar for the drop coat. If you're regulars to my videos, I've always got these guns. I've not got any other guns, they're always Sata, so apologies if you've heard me say this 1,000 times. But you might like to know that there will be some new guns on the channel. They are Sata again, but they're the new Satajet X. So I've got a couple of new Satajet X's, so all my recordings of jobs that I'll be painting in the future are going to be done with those. I've done a couple of jobs with them so far, and I'm really liking them, but you'd expect me to say that. So a little bit of a contamination. That's why this Mipa water base, that first coat can't go on there too wet, because it does pick up. It picks up little bits of contamination. So that first coat's a stabilising coat. But I do find if it does to happen, it seems to happen on silvers and metallic-y colours more than anything. Sometimes it can be a bit of degreaser residue. It picks up stuff like that. So if I do see them, instead of putting the coverage coat over it, putting the wetter coat over it, just fluff a little bit over it. You can't ever really feel it or see it. So if I do see any little contamination, it almost just looks like it separates a little bit when it does pick up any contamination on the first coat. Water base can be a bit finicky like that sometimes. In other systems I've had it doesn't like a bit of solvent. A bit of solvent on the panel or something can react with it. So if I see the little marks that it can leave, that first coat, that stabilising coat, where it's such a thin coat, you can't really feel it or see it. So just by dusting a little bit of base coat over it and drying it, a couple of little dust coats over it, like you would with solvent, where you can just fluff a little bit in, do that, and then get the coverage coats on there, and the contamination is gone. It doesn't ever reappear or show through in the clear coat or anything. So that was one thing that happens sometimes with this system. And other systems that I've used, it happens if you put that first coat on a bit too heavy. I'm not saying that's the same for all base coats, because obviously there's one visit stuff where you put it all on in one coat, so that type of base coat's probably not going to have that issue. So like I say, just getting them coverage coats on there now. I just double them up, get it all done. So that's just 2 visits then for me, getting all the colouring done, and then just a drop coat afterwards. coverage coats on there. I then stick it on a bake cycle at 45 degrees, go in there with my blow dryer, so I use a Satajet 2 blow dryer. Once the heat starts getting in the booth, I go around, dehydrate all the base coat. It's quite critical, this Mipa base coat, to make sure you've got all the water out of it. It's a great base coat. I really enjoy spraying it. I've had a few little teething problems initially. It's a little bit different to other base coats where it's not a latex based, it's a pure water based, which there's not a lot of them out there like that. Most of them are latex based. There's disadvantages and advantages of both, to be honest with you. The latex based ones can dry out a bit quicker. You can put them on in a bit thicker layers. They go on looking smooth initially and wetter, but you've got no scope for any nibbing or anything like that. Whereas this system, the pure water base coats like this Mipa, it's got real good coverage, better coverage than a lot of the latex based ones. It goes on looking a bit patchy and a bit textured, but when it dries out and you get all that water out of it, it's silky smooth, flat as anything. There's no one thing I don't get really is virtually zero dieback from the base coat being textured. Even, you know, high metallic colours with the drop coat, it's still silky smooth. No base coat dust, you know, in the blend areas. So it's really good for blending, good coverage, and really smooth looking appearance, and lays down lovely. It's just critical, especially on the metallics and the silvers. That 1 bar drop coat is crucial, that effect coat, but you get that on there. Once that's dried out, I don't have any issues with the cloudiness or anything like that. So on to the clear coat now. Clear coat I'm using on this job is Mipa CC14 Fixed Tropic, so it's their Fixed Tropic clear coat. The Fixed Tropic properties, if you don't know what that is, it's designed to be put on in thicker layers. It's got a reduced risk of running and sagging and building up on edges. So like the stamping that you get on edges of panels, you know, the fat edges or the beading that you can see on edges of panels that naturally occurs, this Fixed Tropic properties are there to reduce that. And it is a real good clear coat. It is hard to get it to run. It sits there even when you've overloaded it a little bit. I have had one run in it so far. I like to push things to the limit, but overall it really does reduce the risk of getting runs, and the way it sits on the edges of panels, it's great for that. You know, like I say, where you get that beading and that stamping on the edge of a panel, it really minimises that, so it gives you a bit more confidence to, you know, to get a decent amount of clear coat on a job, and you know, to put it on there a bit wetter. So you can see in the pot it's milky looking. I was a bit worried about it when I first poured it out of the tin the first time I used it, seeing how milky it was. I thought it was going to affect colour, but I haven't had any issues on whites or silvers or anything like that. In, you know, where I've clear coated in on a blend panel, it hasn't changed the colour at all. So that milkiness has no effect on colour, which is great. It's just 2 coats. I put the first coat on a little bit lighter than the second coat. Like I say, it's designed to be put on in high layers, so you could probably, you know, if you give it a long enough flash off time, give it maybe a 3rd coat. If you wanted to give a job 3 coats, it's designed to go on in thicker layers than the normal clear coats, and it's got a real reduced risk of solvent popping as well, which is great. So the gun I'm putting this clear coat on with is my X5500. It's a 1.20 setup on that. 2 bar for the first and the second coat. Sometimes I'll knock the second coat down to 1.9, 1.8 bar, depending on the finish I'm looking for. I want it a little bit thicker looking, a bit chunkier orange peel. It's quite a nice finish on this Porsche for a production finish. Quite flat orange peel, but it's got a good sort of depth of gloss to it as well. So I put a nice good closed coat on for the first one at 2 bar, and then the second coat I just knock the pressure down a little bit to 1.9 bar, and I have the fluid, so from full trigger I set the fluid from full trigger where I can feel resistance on the trigger. First coat is half a turn in on this O gun, because this O setup's quite a fast setup, so I do rein it in a little bit, and then I flick between a quarter of a turn in or half a turn in from resistance. Like I say, it's quite a fast gun, the O, and if I've got a bigger job I will always use the O. Like I say, I've got the X's now, so I'll be talking about those in future videos, but I have got a CC gun as well. But I find for jobs, and jobs like this where there's a substantial size, got quite a lot to paint, and for getting in nooks and crannies on bumpers and stuff like that and trims, the O's just a better all-rounder. It just puts a wetter coat on there. It's got that wetter spot in the middle, and it's faster to get around and to get in the areas where it's a little bit tight. With the eye pattern where it's more even and wider spread of material, sometimes it can be a bit trickier to get in smaller areas, so that's sort of why I use this gun. It is my go-to gun. The O setup is my favourite. Well, I've always used Satas. The wettest spot in the middle just suits my spraying style, and I do prefer it to the CC gun. I must admit I haven't got on with it that well, so I haven't been using it, but my new Satajet X that I've got, my clear coat gun, which is an RP like this is an RP. I've got a 1.2i on that, so it's sort of a bit in between from what I've done with it so far. I've found it's a bit in between speed wise and the way the amount of material it puts out. It's in between this O and the CC. That's where I would place it, in between. So yeah, I'm enjoying it because I'm not having to reduce my speed too much, and yeah, the couple of jobs I've done, I've been really pleased with the finish I've been getting with it. So I'll leave you to watch the rest of the clear coat going down on this, and you can see the parts at the end. This isn't the end of this job. I'm going to have to do a third video for this job, so I wanted to show quite a lot of detail on this job. It was a nice car, and we put a lot of effort into this car to make it look right. And this is already quite a lengthy video, and I wanted to show you as much detail of this job as possible. So I'll show you the spraying of the front end, talk you through the blending that I've done on it, and then you'll see it all finished, fitted up, polished, and the final results. So a massive thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like, share and subscribe and all that good stuff. It would really help my channel to grow if you could subscribe if you're not subscribed and you like the content. Been a pleasure as always. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next one. Look after yourselves.